Welcome to Between Two Clinicians, the podcast that gives you a backstage pass to the mind of two therapists. I'm Talia.
And I'm Adam.
Let's get into it. Another adult human to talk to.
Absolutely. I can't. We're back. Every time we do one of these episodes, I just want all the listeners to know that it is like a mini party for Talia and I, because we get to just sort of take our clinical caps off for a second while also being able to be human beings and just talk about it.
Oh, it really is. I'm not advocating for everybody to start their own podcast. Me speaking that I have 3 podcasts, so I think I am the one to talk, but it is so nice to have time set on the calendar to talk to somebody that you admire and care about and are friends with every so often, like every 2 weeks we meet, ideally. That feels so good. I look forward to it. So I just want to say thank you on air. I really appreciate it.
I think the podcast is really like a group therapy process.
Yep.
Just there's 2 of us.
Yeah.
And our multiple personalities.
Yeah. So it's a huge group.
Oh yeah. It's at least 8 people. So this week we're going to finish up what we were talking about with ghosts of the past, right? So
we ended off at the existential question. I was about to say terminal question. That's not what I meant to say. The existential question, who would I be if I liked myself, and how would I show up if I actually did like myself and I weren't weighed down by what I think other people think about me, what I assume other people interpret my behavior as, and if it were up to me and my self-esteem were what dictates the way I move through the world, how would I show up? And can I get to the side of that and actually like myself, or do I need to stay in that one down position? Because like we also talked about last episode, maybe that's how I felt in my whole family, and my whole family system encouraged me to be in that one down position. But now I'm in adulthood and I don't have to be. Wait a second, who do I want to be? And can I like myself?
Yeah, a lot of times we'd like to sit here and say the relationships we've had in the past don't dictate how I show up in the present, when in reality, most of those relationships somehow inform or influence how we show up as we do today. So the reason why the conversation even got hinged on the question of like, what would happen if you actually liked yourself, and who would you be and how would you show up, is because if we stripped away some of these previous experiences you've had from people in positions of authority or people who you felt vulnerable and intimate with, you might actually be shocked at who you would be. I think there's actually a greater amount of people out there living lives that are inherently not their lives to live, but they feel like they have been written into a certain position or role that they can play in life.
Yes. And that role is, I don't know what your thoughts are on this, because it's the first time I'm pitching it to you. The role that we occupy or currently occupy often originates from other definition and not self-definition. And as we get older, then we start, it's like 100% other people try to define who we are, successfully or unsuccessfully. And we have that inner voice, even from, I think, my perspective of who we are, but other people. And I can give a kind of a personal familial example. Hopefully none of my family members are listening, but when my brother was young, my mom, and I love you if you're listening to this is not a negative. If you this is a good trait that you have. My mom is a pediatrician, and she's very intuitive and attuned with children. I mean, think about the type of person who has, dedicate their career to helping the helpless in a way. You know, kids are really indefensible, and they don't have their own defenses yet. So she was very attuned with my brother, and he's an introspective thinker. He's very gregarious though, but as a kid, he was more reserved and observant than the kid who would like interact. He was very intuitive and insightful. So she wrote that, and I think his younger school kind of like for the teachers to get to know who your kid is. You're young, 4 or 5. And I use that as a template, because what she had written was very like sensitive, intuitive, insightful. And what if she had written literally anything else, like bites other children, stay away, like how much the influence of the parent is. But she wrote this, and because teachers knew that, interacted with him that way, and it was accurate, he was I think that fostered that further in him. Whereas if she had written again anything else, who knows what would have happened? Who knows was really this introspective, sensitive, intuitive child, but was labeled otherwise, they're trying to treat him as, if you're watching this on YouTube, they're trying to treat him as this, but really he's going to be fighting against this role that they're trying to put him in. Then kids get labeled as defiant, they're non-compliant, etc. When in reality, they're like, no, I'm just not shy. Or the parent bases the description of the kid off one interaction with somebody that no one likes. No wonder they'd be shy. I would be withdrawn as well. So that role gets defined for us either by our parents or our teachers. And those labels do stick usually through our childhood into adolescence or even adulthood. If you get a nickname in college sometimes, and we're like all in adulthood, and then it's like their college nickname, it's like, why do we still call him whatever, Stinky Steve? Like, we should maybe change that name. It was one time. It's like the Mean Girls made out with a hot dog. It was one time. Like, we get these roles and we might not always want to fulfill them. Then we try and break out and we create our own role, and other people aren't always accepting of that. They will continue to see us as that previous self. I don't know what your thoughts. I know I threw a lot at you.
Well, no, I mean, this sort of goes into like the base understanding of systems theory, which is normally when change becomes present for the individual, the system then will treat the individual as being hostile because they don't want the change. The system's not interested in now the difficulty that comes with self-exploration, right? Like if one person is gaining awareness, now the rest of us have to work hard as well to match that growth one way or another. Or it'd be a lot easier to try to like sort of become more enmeshed and like break down the differentiation. Like let's just discourage the differentiation more than actually trying to match its growth.
Yes.
It's interesting how you talked about these labels and how they sort of like move through our developmental processes. But we see that in like a lot of childhood studies and research, that we're now starting to come out of it where America could have maybe been in an epidemic of the ADHD diagnosis, where essentially everyone's, it's funny, if I start talking about Norcos or Percocets or Vicodin, all of a sudden everyone, oxycodone, whatever it is, it pops out, everyone, oh yeah, the opiate crisis. But then we sort of negate any thought process when it comes to the fact that like we've been using Ritalin on kids almost like Pez dispensers in some cases. Now and Ritalin, Adderall, all sorts of stuff. Again, there are people out there that they need this medication. I am not trying to lump everyone in on the same thing, but I believe that there was a labeling process that happened, especially for little boys, where little boys were expected to act like little girls in the developmental process. What do we know about girls? We know girls, when they're young, they can be extremely good at rule following. They can have
behavior are what drives what they want and what they feel like. Boys and men are driven by like winning, accomplishing, achieving, what conquest. And I'm not talking about like women conquest, like what can I achieve? What stake can I, claim can I stake can I claim, whatever. Yeah, what can I do? And that's what they're motivated by. So to your point, when we expect one to act like the other or think what motivates one motivates the other, of course they're going to be disobedient per what standard? Per what?
Exactly. And so we're not treating them individually. We're lumping them together and then finding ourselves frustrated that they actually act independently of one another.
Correct.
And so the trouble, though, is what happens when I grow up as a little boy where I've been constantly reminded that I'm doing bad. How about if I'm constantly sort of punished for like my intrinsic desires? Is that little boy really trying to be disruptive if he has questions in class? Oh, well, you're supposed to be quiet, or
he's squirming. There's been science that shows they actually do better on tests and assessments when they're able to move through it kinesthetically. And they did another sample where they taught girls the same wiggle movement, etc., and they scored very similar. Like the book, if everybody's interested, it's The Male Brain by Luann Brizendine. Dr. Luann Brizendine goes very much so into depth, and her book, The Female Brain, The Accompaniment, really explains these differences. And I think this does tie into who would I be if I liked myself? If these kids are getting labeled, or you were labeled ADHD or otherwise from childhood with these labels that maybe you felt unlikable or other people didn't like you because they thought you were a certain way, what a gift to give yourself to break out of that label. And to your point, do some more maybe self-research. Like, was it really that I was unlikable, or was I just not meeting somebody else's not good fit standard for me because it was based on the wrong person. Like, I'm not supposed to quote unquote behave. That's not what boys are supposed to do when they're growing up. They're more, usually louder, more physical, more this. Like, the way they have even imaginative play is different than what girls imagine.
Yeah, it's I mean, it is personal to me because for the first 3 years of like first grade, second grade, third grade, I was placed in special education because a lot of times the way that it was coming out, my parents were told that I had behavioral issues in school. They told me, they told my parents, they told me that there seemed to be developmental learning processes that weren't being achieved. And luckily I had parents that were they're very honest about the process. Again, this isn't one of those things where it's like, oh, my kid's teachers are telling me he's a nightmare and they must be wrong. Maybe you do have a nightmare child. But where my incongruence was is my parents were like, well, wait a second. Like, we can send him to church camp. We can send him to Bible study. We can lump him in and all these other, we're not getting this feedback. And then also my father was just intuitive. He's like, he likes to build things. He loves Legos. He can follow instructions. Like, how is he delayed in the development? What we really found out was I was bored, but because I was asking questions, because I was finishing my work faster, I was then being punished as being the disruptive child, exactly, or like, oh, he doesn't follow directions when I was just at a process where like showing my work in math was like mentally frustrating for me because I like knew it. I was like 2 + 2 is 4. How do I have to show it? Like one.
Right answer? Is it not like, the right answer?
Exactly. Yeah. And so the reason why I bring this up is because it totally skewed my whole academic experience. I mean, all the way up through my master's program. I actually ended up having to get EMDR done on me to help me get through my master's program because I was so, I mean, traumatized is the easiest thing, but I was so I did not trust authority in an academic position because I was so used to it being weaponized against me. But then when I actually got EMDR for it, I mean, my EMDR went straight back to a trauma of just a very vibrant memory that I had of, again, being stuck in a class, being confused, wholeheartedly being emotional, but wishing to get greater clarity and being told that I was wrong for seeking that clarity, or essentially being told that my brain was bad, right? Yeah. So that was a ghost from my past. That was something that someone who freely gave me that experience I haven't had contact with for 25 years, but I have this thought process that follows me around every day. And this is where I've had to navigate different things. Like the other thing is I'm severely dyslexic. It runs in my family. It just like it's like the men curse on my mom's side. They have dyslexia. But again, and a lot of times people might actually hear it when I'm speaking because in special education, they won't teach you how to spell words out. I think it's because they get frustrated when you've got a bunch of, #retards. But
label back then, and sometimes
it was, and that you could feel that. You could feel that the teacher was like frustrated, like, we're not going to teach you how to spell things.
Why aren't you learning the normal way?
Yeah. This card, this means tree. Just remember this means tree. Now, the trouble with that is with sight words, then, when I'm speaking, if a word starts with the same letter, ends with the same letter, and it's roughly the same size as a different word, you might actually hear me put that other word in. Right. And so then I have to correct myself. But again, imagine like when I was going through speech class in high school, I was terrified because here I am sort of continuing to work through a handicap that was, again, passed on to me. Right. But I had two choices. I had the ability to either rise above it, say, okay, I know that there is a deficit there that I believe that I can work on, or I can shy away from it. And I don't know what my life would have been. I am actually terrified by that thought process of what if I actually accepted some of the things that people in positions of authority told me as being foregone conclusions for me. what would have I ended up being? I wouldn't have had my master's. I wouldn't
True.
be a licensed therapist.
Yeah.
And so there's a reason why we have to bust these ghosts of the past and going like, no, I need to be who I want to be. Because I came around to this idea pretty young that, wait a second, the world keeps telling me what the world wants me to be, or I can inform the world on who I'm going to become.
Yep. Yes. And that I think it's a Carl Jung quote, or like more Jungian psychology-based quote, that we spend like the first 25 years of our life being who everybody else wants us to be, and the back half, the back nine, so to speak, golf lingo wise, the rest of our lives figuring out who we are, and in some ways undoing and re-narrating and redefining all the other ways that first quarter of a century was probably largely inaccurate.
Yeah. And we don't have to vilify everyone who's in our past here, but a lot of times what happens is their narrative.
We did.
Yeah. Oh, it would be great. That's going to be the next episode. How your parents actually suck with Talia and Adam. Oh my gosh. How to traumatize your 7 proven methods. I love this.
It's so funny. I give this to new parents and I'm like, trust me, just read it, do nothing, and you'll be fine. Like, do none of what it says, do the exact opposite, but it explains it in such a hysterical way that it actually makes you feel much better about parenting, because you're like, oh, as long as I don't do this, I'm fine. Okay. So maybe this would be a great episode. How to traumatize.
You know what? I'm going to buy the book. I'll read it, and then we can do one on it. That'll be awesome.
Yes.
But I mean, let's remember that the same people that were trying to speak in and influence the direction of our lives was probably also dictating the path that they were on based on the fears that they have in life.
Very projected. Absolutely.
So, like, I know that what they were trying to do was out of the kindness of their heart, but they were doing it largely at their own deficits. So, you know, it's funny, the session I had before hopping on here with you, this is very much, we're setting this table right now of this gentleman of like, what are we going to do for you? Not, okay, you've given me the backstory. I know everything about mom, dad, family, all this good jazz. Yeah. What do you want for yourself? Well, I hear this and I hear that. Like, again, everything's so passive. Where I want to know, like, how do you view yourself? Well, I'm not as good as this person, and this sibling's better than I am, and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Again, like, and I can understand that, like, people get frustrated with me because I will start, like, breaking it down Barney style. Like, I got crayons. Like, we've got to get simple.
Yes.
Like, no. You keep on talking about all these other things. Like, oh, well, I should be here for this age and for that age. My encouragement for you, again, is no, I want you to just pull out a piece of paper. And if you were to let your, like, mind melt away, I don't care about, like, whatever financial hardships you have, whatever it might be. If you were to write down 3 things that you would want to accomplish for yourself in the next 5 years, let's go for it. What would those things be? Yeah. Maybe I do want to go back to school. Maybe I want to finish school. Maybe I want to buy a house. Maybe I want to invest in myself and I want to open my own business. Whatever it is. But then start walking that back. Why haven't I allowed myself to become actualized in that? Why can't I have action to do that? And a lot of times then we start coming up with all these different excuses that, again, are not our own. They're not even reflective of us. Oh, well, there's a lot of risk in it. Well, there's also a lot of risk in living a life unfulfilled. Yeah.
Yeah. And to I think so many people struggle with realizing what true fulfillment could be for them. And if they have realized it, they might struggle with actualizing it. So I know what it is, but this is the whole, like, who would I talked about this in a group I lead on Tuesday nights for codependency recovery. Like, who would you be and who would you not become? And that's what I teach even through. Do I stay at this job? Do I break up? Do I divorce? Do I propose? Like, if you stay and nothing changes, who will you be? Who will you not become? And if you leave, who would you be and who would you, like, what are our choice points here? I'm very, again, existential when those questions come up and they look at it and they're like, even though I don't like that I would have to change, the alternative of who I don't get to become if I stay is not the vibe. Like, I really can't stomach that. And I realize it, and I want to go actualize that version of myself in order to reach that fulfillment. I want that out of my life, even if, like we've talked about before, even if it means disappointing other people. My relationships change. I might not have the exact same role in my family system for my family of origin. I'm okay with that because of what it means to me on the other side of actualizing that.
Really well put. I mean, sometimes the way that I come in is also sitting on that thought process of like, you may feel stuck in life.
Yeah.
Can you accept who you are today as the peak of your ability?
Ooh.
Or will it be easier for you to continue to actually climb this mountain? Because that's where we're at. You want to talk about difficulty, it's going to be difficult in accepting that this is my peak.
Yeah.
It's probably going to be not as hard to continue to build on progress. Not perfection, but progress. If we lean into that, you never know where you can go. The sky's the limit.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, this is stuff where I get very passionate because I sit down with people. I feel like there's always a timeline here. It's like I'll sit down with 20-year-olds, I'll sit down with 30-year-olds, I'll sit down with 50-year-olds, and I'll sit down with like 60-year-olds. And what's interesting is a lot of times the 20-year-old and the 60-year-old have the same problem, but they have massively different resource issues. The 20-year-old still has a runway in front of them. They still have the ability to get this thing off the ground. A 60-year-old still, I'm not going to say there's fatalism. They could maybe make it work, but it's going to be significantly harder, right? Because there's different obligations, there's different liabilities and limitations. And so it's much harder for that 60-year-old. But what's funny is we tell ourselves, like, man, if I get to 55, then I'll be able to handle and deal with all the bullshit that I put on the back burner because I needed the house and I needed the 2.5 kids and I needed the 401k. And like, no, what you're actually doing is you're sort of fortifying your own prison. Like, you're the one putting the bars up on the walls and in the windows and making like the better mousetrap. Because this isn't just about, oh, what am I willing to accept? You're actually starting to become the person that's trying to talk yourself into believing that this is okay.
Yeah, and I think when we've been in a system that encourages a certain way of thought, or growing up in a hyper-critical household, a hyper fear-based household, or a laissez-faire, very passive, where no one was helping you form independent thought or learn to make decisions, that style of thinking or that way of trying to reason with what you're going through doesn't usually leave until you analyze further, whether that's in coaching or therapy. I've worked with many a client, myself included, where there has been an unexamined belief that is still operating on the subconscious that is really fundamentally, if that were to be different, could change the whole way this person's life is going. Scarcity mindset, we've talked about, more fear-based mindset, things, and sometimes to a delusional level, well, things will always work out. Things always go my way. Okay, but there might be some other things that you need to do with that. No, I don't need to look any further. Things always go my way. But then that same person might come in a few sessions later and be like, I don't know why this didn't go my way. Not everything is going to be set it and forget it. So there has to be this balance of living an examined life, but not so much examination that you're paralyzed, and not no examination that you're like, well, it'll just be what it is. Like, that's one option, but I think maybe it's more beneficial growth, to your point, like growth wise in getting there, to actually learn how and if you need to think differently to like yourself, like we've been talking about, and let go of those ghosts of the past. You don't have to see yourself the way other people have seen you. You can change that.
I mean, just on that thought process, like, is that powerful or is that paralyzing? You actually have the ability to change.
Yeah.
Now, what I found, though, is sometimes is when I bring that up, when we bring that awareness into a session, I get two different clients. I have one client that has the epiphany, the aha moment. Oh, wait a second. I don't have to accept victimhood as being the sole sort of strategic position I'm in life. And then I have that other person who sort of latches onto victimhood It's like, but
it could be,
or just like, well, I've never seen it. If you ever actually pursued it, because see, here's the difference. If I'm raised in a home where I'm surrounded by miserable individuals,
Yep.
very rarely am I going to be surrounded by individuals that have a strong internal locus of control.
Yes.
Everything's going to largely be external.
Mm-hmm.
This it's funny. I'm blue collar background, so it's like the sawmill shuts down, the truck drivers get let go, the coal mine closes, whatever it is. But we also we completely sort of relinquish any responsibility of being like, well, we kind of saw it coming, right? Or like, what did I do to insulate myself or my family from these things happening?
Right.
That seemed like that was too much energy to be exhausted. So I sort of stayed in active avoidance. And now that it bit me, I have no other way to handle and process this but to blame other people. Well, this shouldn't have happened to me. I kept showing up on time. They literally had a going out of business sale. The sign was up. Your job was ending. Why did we not look for something else?
Yeah.
Well, I was always on time.
I've worked with clients like that too. And that, well, I'd rather it's almost as though they would rather wait for the fire to erupt than take the necessary precautionary measures to insulate their house, their life from the fire. Deal with it when it comes, because and some are like, it hasn't ever shown up, so the likelihood that it would show up is nil. Or the last time it showed up, the way I approached it was by dealing with it after the fire was already there. You can prevent it. Just because you've done something a certain way in the past doesn't mean that's the only way you do it in the future. On the same vein of, I used to do this thing and I disliked myself for it. Can I start to like myself for this same trait, for this dark sense of humor, for this ability to be assertive, for being able to say what I want or don't want from other people and be okay with them being disappointed? Maybe those things are behaviors that I used to dislike myself for or fear others like me for. And now I can actually change, engage in those behaviors and be proud of myself for them. And I like that about myself and I own that about myself. The whole world can open up when you start actualizing who you really are meant to be and not living your life for other people or for the sake of pleasing other people and being compliant. That would not be the life I would recommend, is out of compliance.
But it's just it's interesting how we keep on using these like reinforcing narratives to sort of like make sure we never get off the starting block. There's an awesome metaphor that I love to talk about, which is two wildebeest are standing at the edge of a pond. They're looking in the pond, and one wildebeest says to the other, "That's a crocodile." And he goes, "What?" And he's like, "That piece of wood over there." And the other one says, "No, that's a crocodile." They go back and forth for like 5 minutes, and the wildebeest that keeps on saying it's a crocodile is like, "God damn it, let me show you." He steps on it, it's a crocodile, gets eaten, and gets pulled in the water. Another wildebeest walks up next to the now educated wildebeest, and the educated wildebeest says, "That's a crocodile." The other wildebeest says, "That's a piece of wood." Like,
I'm not doing this.
Like, but it's hysterical because how many times have we seen that happen? We see it happen to a person, but then like, oh, that's a crocodile. And the next person comes up and now we're like, oh, I got to talk this idiot into it. If I know the information and I know that for the goodness of my own well-being, I can use this information to safeguard myself, why don't I do it?
Yeah, that is one of the existential questions. If I know better, or I know an alternative that could be healthier, let's say, why not avail myself of it? And one of my first thoughts on why people don't avail themselves of that and continue to stay stuck in that pattern of not liking themselves is fear.
Yeah.
I don't want to change. I don't want to have to be different.
You know, a lot of times we like to look at life as maybe the support network that I have around me. It's like we're all sitting in a life raft, right? And we feel like we're all doing this thing together. What happens if in reality your support network is a series of anchors?
Sinking, yeah.
It's not so much sinking, but it's keeping you where you are. Like, you can't move past it. It doesn't have to be that it's dragging you under the water, but they're definitely not allowing you to move. Speaking to what you were bringing up there in fear, I think that this is more realistic. We see this a lot where individuals will actually disregard their own self-preservation because they're afraid of going it alone more than they are willing to sink down with a bunch of other individuals. Like, I'm willing to accept this if there's actually a concert of support. If we can band together and tell ourselves this is the best we could do, everyone else was against us, screw it, here we are. And I know some of you are like, well, how do we think of it? It's Democrats and Republicans. Like, we do it believe it or not, we find our own groups. Doesn't matter, but we find our own groups that sort of, again, reinforce the narratives that we believe, and then we roll with it. And that's why we can get to such an extremist position where it's like everyone's either the enemy or you're with me. But then again, are the people who are with me, are they actually caring about my own personal health and well-being? Or they just need me to be a component in the machine?
That's like the episode we had on speaking up to our therapist if we don't like what they've said. Do you want somebody who can challenge you and be your advocate and actually grow you in a different direction? Or do you want somebody who's just going to parrot back and be, and like you worded it in that episode, like an echo chamber? And I'm pretty sure I said, like, just find a friend who can do that. You don't need to pay someone up to be or get a professional relationship established in order for them to parrot you. And I think a lot of growth happens when we are able to challenge those narratives that we have, be able to hear a different belief, and instead of going, well, that's not the one I have, so it automatically is wrong, you can arrive at that. I'm not saying you won't ultimately do that, but give some liminal space in between to what are they after? Why is that belief important to them? I wonder what they went through that led them to believe that. Have they ever examined it? And that's very true of the usual no-nos that were not, all the things that are off limit used to be off limits in the first date are now like usually what people leave on profiles is like, here's my religion, here's my politics, here's my views. Like, it's such a different landscape now. What beliefs do people hold, and where did they come from? Was it from a family system that they never examined? That's the way we've always done things, so why do it any differently? And how was, to your point earlier, how were the people who raised me, if they were around, how were they able to help me have thought and critical thinking and understanding and tolerance, which means to interact with and still have respect for, of others? I don't have to agree with everything. I don't have to like everything. If I understand where you're coming from, though, and we're friends, and maybe we have a different opinion, I can get behind why you think that. I know I'm not going to ever change your mind, so I'm okay with letting sleeping dogs lie. That's fine with me. That's just part of what we talk about, rather than continually interacting with people like, well, I can't change their mind and they must not like me because of this trait. Well, do they like you for all these other traits? Yeah. Could we focus on that instead of trying to make them be this perfect alignment you are and never challenge you? I think this question that we posed at the beginning really does go there's so many, like, I'm imagining like that's the tree trunk. There's so many roots underneath it where this stems from.
I mean, that's a perfect metaphor for just the enmeshment, right? Like, we always want that like poison pill, that one thing that's gonna work, and it's not one thing. And that's why we have to, again, be very introspective about what are the narratives that I'm accepting, what are the beliefs that maybe I'm building my life on, and are those beliefs even representative of me and my time? Because a lot of times they're not. They're actually something else that we've picked up. Someone gave us this and said, this is safe.
This is the way.
This is the way. May not be the way. It could be for them, might not be for me.
No, we talked about this too, like off air before, about houses. And you no longer, luckily, live in Southern California. So you could probably buy a house for the price of a goat, like my parents could back in the day. But it's so much different. I was talking to a mortgage lender this morning, just doing a consult, and we were talking about like pacing it in the right timing, and the advice, which at the time of the advice given 10, 20, 30 years ago was solid advice. It simply doesn't apply to most areas any longer. Does that mean it's bad advice? Not necessarily. It means it's not applicable anymore. In spite of the times changing, And I think for us as individuals, what applied 10, 20, 30 years ago as feedback, as advice, as likability factors is naturally going to change. If I was good at sharing in preschool, I might still be good at sharing decades later, but that's probably not my best trait that I would lead with. I would say like sense of humor or compassion or kindness. Like you need to update your own love map with yourself. Why do I like myself and what are some of the traits that I take pride in, and can I lead with that now, not keep the same view of who I was or pieces of advice on who I was 10, 20, 30, 40, however old you are years ago. You want to update that view of yourself.
I loved how you started talking about the love map, because it literally goes back to like the topography of who you are in your life can change.
Yep.
And we also have to talk about just like, so when, Sacagawea was taking Lewis and Clark around, right? Like they had a map, but I'm guessing it's different than the Google Maps app, right?
I would imagine.
Same continent.
Yes.
Much greater level of detail, right? Yep. Well, this is the same thing that happens with us emotionally, especially if maybe you have people in positions of authority told you this was bad, that's bad, just stay away from here, do this, don't worry about that, stop asking questions, whatever it might be. You're running off of a map that's a 5-year-old map, but you're a 33-year-old person.
Yes.
Like, and this is why we talk about the inner child work, is because sometimes you are walking through life still holding on to the X marks the spot crayon map.
Yeah.
And when in reality, it's you don't even acknowledge that there's all these other resources that you have now that you didn't have then.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you're right. My mom and dad wouldn't do this for. Well, guess what? Thank God. You're 30-something years old. They're no longer the primary voices in your life. You're not actually handcuffed to what they can and cannot provide.
But how many clients hold that in their mind? And I don't know if you ask this to your clients ever or get this like feedback. But I'm like, and where did you learn that from? And they're like, carry the two. Oh my God. Yeah. That's my mom. I'm like, yeah, you're dating your parent, which is in imago therapy, like very common. Like not literally. Please don't take that. Don't take this little clip out of context. That is not normal or healthy or legal in many areas. Hopefully, that's not what we're talking about.
Everyone's clearing their search history right now. Like, I'm done with your stepmom didn't get stuck in a dryer.
Trevor Wallace has one of my favorites on that. I'm a huge Trevor Wallace fan. I've gone to pretty much all of the local shows, but he has a really funny bit on that. But in the workup of the topography of our mind, who is our romantic partners and the likability factors, it is what familiarity is. That doesn't mean it's healthy, which we've talked about before. No. Those traits might be familiar, and we end up realizing, with some of the great traits also comes the not so great traits that irritate me. And because I'm used to, I liked it, I'm used to interacting with that, I pick somebody who fit that mold. And I haven't examined that yet. I haven't examined where these beliefs come from. It comes from my parents. Okay, do you want to keep it? Or do you want to have a different belief for yourself and your family that comes from you moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, and what's funny is if people, I can almost hear the collective sigh. And it's not of relief. It's people of like, how do I want to deal with this? And what we're actually talking about here is about reclaiming power in your life. Like, I think that there's no argument to be made that absolutely our parents hold a significant amount of power in our lives, whether it's up to 18, maybe it's up to 23, maybe it's up to the last time you lived in their house. True. There can be a tremendous amount of power when there's like financial stuff intertwined. There's a lot there. But if you're out of that system, there's now a whole nother set of responsibilities.
Yeah.
And those responsibilities are the ones for you to accept. Like, okay, I'm no longer under my parents' roof. I'm building my own roof. I'm building my own home. These relationships that I have are now the primary voice in these relationships should be my own.
Yeah.
So I don't get to actually sit, because I use imago therapy all the time in my couples work. Yeah. But what I find hysterical is sometimes when we look at the deficit in the present relationship, you'll have one partner say, well, that's because of my mother. That's because of my dad. And that's like, no. We can't actually get him or her to co-sign your bullshit. That was actually you. Like, yes, someone gave that to you, and then you freely gave that to someone else.
Yeah, you have not yet done the work to extricate yourself from those times and to be different. And I love it when couples have that or those moments where they look at their partner and they're like, oh, wait a second. That's not something I like about myself. That's not something I like about who I got it from. I want to be the likable version of me and show up as that in a relationship. And they actually shift. They're like, I was about to react as though I was the 9-year-old little girl getting yelled at by my dad growing up. And I realized you're not my dad, thankfully. And I don't need to respond to you in that way. And I can have a new system of that really brought me back. I'm still acknowledging it brought me back. I almost did something and acted in a way that it's not genuine to me. I don't like that. Can I try again? Can I do this differently? And the partner go, sure, because so often they might have projective identification and they knew what it was like on the other side of that. And then we've talked about this a ton, we get in that, but to be able to break that cycle with our partner and show up as the version of ourselves we like the most and have a partner who also loves that version of us, that's really where I think romantically, at least, healing really starts. Being your true authentic self and being accepted and respected for that in return, rather than a partner trying to change you, or if they were just different in these ways, or I like this about them but I don't like this, and I'm like, tough noogies, that's the whole package. Especially
this is who you have.
Yes.
Right. And it's not like some people are like, oh, so you want me to accept less? No, let's also imagine that you're not perfect as well. So like, while we can really easily normally call out the so-called defects of our partner, we probably should also open ourselves up to being willing to hear the equal amount of criticism on maybe where we don't show up.
Yes.
But this is an interesting thought process. Maybe you're used to that criticism coming from someone in a position of authority, so you didn't have the ability to critique them, right? Like, you can't turn back and be like, well, you're a shitty mommy, right? You whop ham. Okay. Well, just because you weren't able to do that then doesn't mean that you are unable to now say, okay, I hear that, but these are also ways that I need you to show up.
Yes.
Because that's why we get stuck in, again, that loop of I'm now arguing with my significant other as if they're my mother or my father, when my spouse is probably asking for me to show up as a fully developed adult, like an emotional adult.
And being one of my fondest memories was working with a couple that I coached a few years ago, and it was I can do it, but you can't do it kind of a thing. Like, what's mine is mine and what's yours is mine also. Like, those themes and patterns were coming out. And one of the members of the couple was frustrated by the other member of the couple not being as tidy or leaving it, which we've known before. Typically the gender stereotype, if we're in that, even women can get like this, but in single focus mode, I'm thinking of, I need to shower, I need to make myself some food, I need to go back to this. So you'll see a little trail of where these thought processes get dropped off. And I asked the member who was frustrated, do you ever do that? And the other member jumped in, she leaves her socks around all the time, she does this, she's expecting me to be all tidy while she can just be in the house however she wants. And I was like, okay, new rule. Neither of you get to complain unless you are keeping your side of the street clean and there is literally none of your clutter. Then you can actually bring this up to your partner. And like 2 sessions later, they came in, they're like, we fixed it.
Yeah. Like, that was, we've come to realize that that's unsustainable, so we're both going to be allowed to exist.
I was complaining at him for wanting him to be different when I wasn't even upholding that behavior in my own life. I wasn't honoring that request. I was being incongruent. And that obviously wasn't going to be motivating for him to do it. If you can do that and that person knows like they like it, a clean house, they value themselves, then that is a more reasonable request to make of the partner. And I've fallen into that because we're getting adjusted, new life stuff coming up. So we're moving parts of our house around and I'm looking at it, I'm like, this is a fucking shit show right now. And it stresses me out, but I have to have radical acceptance. And every time he comes home, I'm like, I know it's cluttered. I'm sorry. I'm almost done adjusting the room and this. And he's like, no worries. He's okay because he knows it's temporary. Other than that, like pretty immaculate. Yeah, we'll leave some clothes. Both of us will do that. But there's a certain standard to uphold that I know I like myself most when I have a neat and tidy house, and I don't like myself a lot in who I become when I'm living in clutter and chaos. So knowing your most liked version of yourself, upholding that standard in your life also allows your partner or partner to be, oh, they mean business. They take workout routines seriously. They like time with their friends, whatever it is. I'm not going to come in and try and take that away from them. I support them and let them grow in that.
Well said.
Yeah. Yeah.
So where do you think we go in like wrapping this thought process up?
Yeah.
So we've given them 45 good minutes of like how we start landing the plane.
Yeah, I think asking, or if you're listening to this, asking yourself if any of what we talked about, all the roots that we went into today resonates, and if you really have ever thought to yourself, who would I be if I liked myself? What, maybe you and I can rapid fire some questions. Would I have the same job if I truly liked myself and was loud and proud about it? Would I have the same partnership? Would I show up in the same way? How would I interact with my family? How would I interact with my friends? What would I tell myself when I look in the mirror? I think being able to really take an inventory of if you like yourself or not, take, some self-esteem assessments. And when you think about what those results are, how does that impact your life? And you and I know this from working with a lot of clients, that if we have a lower self-esteem or negative disposition or view of self, we won't show up as though we did have high self-esteem. So being able to help them kind of consolidate all that we've talked about today, I would, if you're listening, don't do this while you're driving, but get out a journal and ask yourself those questions and see if, goodbye, that's the last episode I ever listened to. Do you like yourself? And if not, what needs to change? What behavior you're engaging in that you're like, I hate myself when I do this?
Yeah. It's funny because it's almost like we're flirting with the line of self-love, and self-love is probably something that I hate the current definition of it. I love actually what it means in a healthy way, but a lot of times we use self-love as like a justification to use distracting like interventions with a justification that it's being helpful. Like self-love is not getting hammered at a pool in Las Vegas. Like probably a hard sell there. It's a lot of fun. It's a
girl in the bathroom and making plans.
Yeah, it's a ton of fun till you wake up with a different last name. But I mean, like there's some things there, right? So I think when we're really talking about this, when I think of like, man, what would it be like if you really liked yourself? And I know that there's probably plenty of people listening like, wait a second, I really do like myself. I imagine there is probably a large percentage of you that does. But more importantly, I want you to focus in on the aspects that you don't like about yourself. And now I want you to actually think about,
keep going.
Do I not like these things because they bother me? Or do I hear different voices popping into my head? Do I hear my mom? Do I hear my dad? Do I hear these other positions of authority that are informing me on why I don't like certain parts of myself?
I love that you brought that up. I have another exercise for our listeners after you're done with.
Perfect. And so the reason why I want you to sit with this is because sometimes you're going to find out that parts of yourself that you've labeled as bad or that you shouldn't mess with, that wasn't you. Like, it didn't help you become more productive.
Yeah.
It was more of like, I was told not to go there. It's sort of like the whole Sandlot principle, right? Like, don't go into that backyard. You don't know really why. There's rumors. Those rumors are a lot of times what you make up to justify you not actualizing that part of yourself. But then when you actually get on the other side of the fence, you realize it was never really that scary to begin with.
Yeah.
That, like, there is no man-eating dog over there. Or more importantly, you're not going to uncover some sort of cardinal sin that's going to doom you as a person. But a lot of times we're told that, oh no, you don't want to do that because you're going to be lazy or you're going to be unsuccessful, or there's something bad there. In reality, it's like, well, no, I've actually got a greater blind spot now that I don't know who I am really as a whole individual.
Yeah. There's, I think, something to be said for that scene in The Lion King where I forget who the characters are, but they're sitting there and it's like, oh, what's that place over there? And I think it's like the dad and Simba talking.
Yeah.
Oh, that's the dark, scary place. Like, don't go over there. So much of our lives, I think, is orchestrated around us doing that in our own psyche. I don't want to go to that dark shadowy part, and that's where this exercise will come in handy. And I'm sure many of us in grad school have understood it. But it's the Johari window. So it's a framework for your conscious and your unconscious. And we can link it in the episode. But you want to get out like a piece of paper and write some quadrants. And depending on which way you're looking at it. So like, let's say you're looking at the piece of paper and you have it in quadrants. What is known to you and known to others? Like, what are traits that you would say about yourself and others would say about you? What are traits that other people would say about you, but you wouldn't necessarily? So in this case, you maybe ask people, like, what are 5 traits that you use to describe me? What is bottom, the third 1, 2, 3, 4, this one would be, what is your hidden area? You know it, but you don't show other people your shadow parts. And then what is this like true unknown part where other people don't know it about you and you don't know it about you? That's what you impart doing. And there's another iteration that we use in psychoanalytic thought where it's like good me, bad me, and then what you're striving for and what you like, what you want people to describe you as, and what people want to describe you as. Like for me in that quadrant, it's meek. No one I have met, I don't think, would ever describe me as meek. It's just not a trait. And if somebody called me that, I'd be like, okay. I would not take it personally.
They would immediately find out they were incorrect. Something like, listen here, bitch. And then like, oh, misread that situation.
Right? So those traits, if somebody called you what you know and others know is like, that's never going to be a thing, you don't usually have a reaction. It's when somebody else labels you or tells you who you are as a trait that you are trying to desperately hide about yourself, that you hope to whoever your higher power is, nobody ever sees that in you. But when you start to own those traits, then somebody comes up to you and they're like, you're this. And you're like, and then it loses all its power. Like I used to be very concerned if anybody knew I was judgmental. And now I've always known that, but I now own it loud and proud. And I've told clients that. I'm not saying many people have the connotation of like being bitchy and like picky, and it's not that. It's being able to be discerning. And my gut reaction is my gut reaction of don't like that, do like that. Sometimes I'm right, sometimes I'm wrong. That's more of an exception than the rule. I'm okay with being judgmental, and I'm okay with bringing that with clients, with family, with friends. It's not a trait I hide about myself in any area of my life, and I feel better because of that. And there's a way to frame that, or being assertive. That's another trait that I love about myself that's not going away anytime soon, that I used to hide in relationships. And when it would come out, they're like, whoa. And I'm like, oh, that wasn't very ladylike. I'm sorry. But in this one, which is my forever, I was like, yeah, this is who I am, like in a nice way, in a kind way, and deal with it. And he's like, yeah, that works for me. He's the meme where it's like, well, why do the quiet guys always date the fiery girls? It's like, well, somebody's got to tell the waiter my fries are cold, and it's not going to be me.
Exactly. Isn't that the truth? Yeah. My steak is not cooked appropriately, and my wife will handle this.
He's like, okay.
Yeah, exactly.
He is very much so the go with the flow. Oh, don't bother. And I'm like, no, we are going to bother. Like, this is happening. This is an experience that we paid for. Like,
let me get my stir stick.
Sometimes he'll like put the spoon down.
Yeah.
So knowing that exercise helps you to own those parts of yourselves, and that's really the culmination. Who would I be if I liked myself? I would be somebody who owned those dark, shadowy traits that I hope no one ever finds out about, except plot twist. Now when people find out about it, neither of us are surprised, and I can now be more of myself and like myself more, and others can like me more too.
Yeah, I mean, I know that we've got a backlog of episodes here, but I mean, it's almost like we need to do the be a bitch and an asshole episode. Like, because what's funny is like just listening to you expand on this thought process. I mean, so if you're assertive, if you're confident,
Yep.
and if you have discernment,
yes,
you're either a bitch or you're an asshole. Like, why? Largely because if you have those three qualities, people can't get you to do what they want you to do.
And people don't like when you don't comply.
Yeah. Again, what I brought up earlier in our conversation, the system likes compliance.
Yes.
When the system sees that someone's differentiating, the system becomes insecure. Mm-hmm. And then that's when that hostility starts going after that differentiating individual.
Yep.
But these are the things that we have to think about. That's why I want you to think about why do you dislike parts of yourself? And is that really true anymore? Well, I was always told I was like something that just kills me with young girls is hearing that they're bossy. You know, I was told I was really bossy, yes. Right? And so then we start shaming girls into not using their voice, which then largely builds more resentful young women. And then how does that normally come out? We then start saying like, man, they're just such bitchy people. Wait a second. So they're bossy. We don't like it when they tell us what they want. Then they're imploding because they're holding on to all this resentment because they're told that they can't articulate what they want. And then now we're saying, oh, they're bitchy. They're just so whiny. It's like, well, wait a second.
Know what they need and say it out loud. I think that comes from envy in part.
Oh, it does.
How you're wording it, of course. But yeah.
People do not like it when someone with confidence is able to say, this is what I want and how I need it. This is how it will positively affect me.
So, like, that was so direct and not...
Well, it takes risk, right?
Yeah.
Because if I actually put it out there, then what happens if someone actually meets those?
Yes.
Like, this is what's incredible is we're scared of, like, well, what if someone actually does that thing? So we'd rather accept the inverse.
Yes. What if they do meet all of your needs? Oh, then I would be in a conscious relationship. And that's where I think sometimes that fear is. I've said this quote for years. It's my own quote, I believe. If anybody else has said it first, let me know. I'm happy to give credit where credit is due. You're not actually afraid of not getting what you want because most of you are currently living that reality. You're afraid to get what you want because that requires you to become a different version of yourself. And it also probably requires you to like yourself in order to uphold and maintain what you are getting and receiving, the partner you want, the job you want, the lifestyle you want. You have to be up-leveled versions of yourself to sustain that in many areas.
Yep. Man.
It's great. Yeah, look at us. You're welcome, all of you.
Yeah. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you guys in 2 weeks.
God willing, yes.
Yeah, because, I mean, if you want to grow, be stagnant or whatever.
Yeah, and stop listening.
Do it. Yeah.
You're going to get something from here.
Yep, and go listen to some other person.
Well, thank you, listeners. And again, if you have any questions, we love answering them in long form. You can slide in my DMs or my Q&As that I try to do once a week at Talia Bombola. And then if you want to find Adam, where can they find you?
Wild Ethos Counseling on Instagram and the rest of the world.
Yep, it's all the same across the board. And we hope that you are safe and smart in the meantime. And I'm going to pull this from my other podcast. The co-host uses this as the sign-off to take good care. I will use that.
Yes, as the cookie crumbles.
Up with very weird idioms and use that as a sign-off.
Yeah, exactly. What would I say? Like, well, there is a old mantra of I used to be in safety meetings and we used to say this all the time because I had a really salty OSHA manager, but don't add to the population and don't retract from the population.
That is good advice. Okay.
Yeah, you know,
we'll leave them with that today.
See ya.